Welcome back to Questing Beast. I am Ben. Today we're taking a look at a book that was requested by my patrons over on Patreon, and that is the Monster Overhaul, a practical bestiary by Skrpls. The idea of this book is that it is a Dungeons & Dragons monster manual, but it takes those monsters, along with a few that you probably haven't seen before, and it reformats them in a way that is ideally a lot more useful and practical than your standard monster manual. As a lot of tools, as a lot of extra information that makes the monsters more variable and more gameable at the table. Quick reminder before we get started, I am doing a giveaway right now where at the end of the month, I'm giving away a copy of this, the Sorcery Contested Realm deck box. It has all 4 starter decks for the collectible card game. You can play it as a standalone board game with these 4 decks if you want to, or you can get into the whole CCG if you feel like it. It's a cool game. I did a review on it recently, but I'm giving away a copy. All you have to do is be subscribed to the Questing Beast newsletter, link down in the description below. Here's our front end pages. So every space in this book is used for something useful. It's got a ribbon bookmark. It is all stitch bound, very solidly put together right here. As usual, links to where you can get this in print or PDF will be in the description. And this is, I would say, mostly focused on random tables. The book that reminds me the most of is actually the Augmented Reality source book, which is one of my favorite books for cyberpunk role-playing games. This book is just tons of random tables filling out information when running a cyberpunk city. And what this does something very similar, but for monsters. It takes every monster and even concepts surrounding monsters and gives you tons and tons of options that you can reflavor them and tweak them and twist them to make them more interesting. There is a wide variety of art featured in this book from a number of different artists. We'll see that as we go through this. Some of them are really, really great. I really love Luca Reyes' stuff especially. Lots of thanks to different OSR bloggers. And we can see that there's 20 main chapters right here. So he takes 200 monsters, breaks them into 20 different categories of 10 monsters each. The different categories are really based around different themes. For example, there are just people, that might be mercenaries or wizards and stuff like that, but also dungeon monsters, types of dragons, thinking beasts, heraldic beasts, primeval, elemental, and there's even 4 based on the different seasons. So depending on where your characters are, the season of the year it is, their location, you can easily pick from a couple of chapters to find the types of monsters that would be there. We have some pretty standard encounters over here, some combined encounters where more than one creature from this chapter is combined together, and all of these have omens. So you can hint to the players what is coming up, what is just around the next bend, by indicating the smells or the sounds of that encounter, and that can give them clues as to whether they want to engage or whether they want to run and hide or maybe just observe. Many of the chapters include maps of locations that are suitable for that chapter. For example, the people chapter includes a generic village and a generic inn that you can grab right away and use as a starting location. Some of the later monsters have layers specific for that monster that are already created for you. They are, as they are labeled, pretty generic, which makes them a bit less useful than I would have liked, but they do give you a general idea of what that thing is going to look like. So here's our very first creature, the Adventurer, appropriately enough. The stat blocks always have the number appearing at the beginning with their hit dice and their hit points, and they have a lot more description than you would often get in a monster manual. It has an appearance, a voice, it has wants, it has morality, and intelligence, which is really great for figuring out how to roleplay this character. There's always a little write-up right here. It usually doesn't go into tremendous depth about the creature, but it tends to give you the stuff that is more actionable and is more relevant to a campaign, the stuff that would affect the actual gameplay. The real standout feature of all of these different creatures is these random tables though. For example, there's some vices right here along with a goal, so you immediately know what the character is after. Why are these adventurers here? You can have the different type, the different races, and the different subtypes over here. And then we have 100 adventurers. So with just this random table, you're never going to run out of ideas. You can either grab the name and just read straight across, or you can randomly generate each of these categories by rolling D100 4 times. Maybe you'll get a Fen Guy. His notable features is that he is luminous and has purple warts. His skill and profession is that he is a guard, and his specialty tool is a soul-cutting scythe. There's a list of plenty of different types of names for elves, dwarves, halflings, different regions and settlements, a generic world map, which is pretty funny because it has, the ancient wall, the blasted heath, castle chivalry, all your stereotypical things in a D&D game. This is, like I said, the generic stuff is really not that useful. I guess it gives you ideas that you can draw from, archetypes that you can expand upon, but probably most people aren't going to use a generic world map as is. You want a barbarian? Here's a barbarian with some feats of strength. Barbarian nations just over the horizon. What do these barbarians want? 100 different barbarians. This sort of thing continues throughout the entire book. It's not all the same format either. Cultists, for example, you don't necessarily need 100 cultists. It's more useful if you focus on their particular cult. So what are their rituals? What are their requirements? There are gods and things to summon. These cultists shout while attacking, "Your souls will fuel our ascension," or "Even death cannot stop us," or "Die, ye of little faith." Again, useful stuff, funny, you can throw it in really easily. Knights have plenty of different inconvenient quests. There's famous quests. There's eccentricities that particular knight has. They might have dishonorable secrets that you can uncover. Mercenaries all have reasons why they can't fight today. There's different groups with their leaders and their personal reputations. There's D50 different mercenary missions, because mercenaries are always giving you missions, or you can send them on missions, and so on, and so on, and so on. D100 peasants, townsfolk, lots of townsfolk. Wizards, of course, with lots of random tables for making your particular weird wizard. The real stunning thing about this book is just the sheer amount of content within it, which is really kind of gobsmacking to me. I don't understand how this was all written by one person and how long it took to do all of this. But there is just a virtually infinite amount of information and pieces of flavor and gameable content that you can pick up, slap in, and easily change your campaign or make it more useful, or just throw some variety in there. Every once in a while you get a monster like the goblins or the lich here that has a lot more information, and that's usually a lot of fun to go through. The bits of flavor are just really fun and unique, like this whole section on goals for liches and why they all need goals, right? Because when you live for that long, you start going insane unless you have some single purpose that you're driving towards, usually something almost impossible that's going to occupy your attention for eternity. Maybe you want to extinguish the sun, or you're trying to ascend to divine status, or tunnel into hell, seal the gates forever, and mete out justice. And then there's always the current project or the stage that you're at right now, or the monster is at when you encounter them. Flipping through the book, it's really hard to pick out stuff to highlight because there's something really fun on almost every page. Here we got oozes, tons of different types of oozes. They all have new special abilities. What is embedded in this particular ooze? You got twists on them. Maybe this one's frozen. Opening a door will release a gentle flood of warmed water, slowly thawing the ooze. Or above a ceiling hatch with a dangling rug pull, yank to unlock, and now the ooze falls on top of you. You got the different textures for the oozes. What do the locals use it for? Waste products make superb fertilizer, or those consumed go to a nasty afterlife. There's just so much fun in here. Some of these monsters I remember seeing bits and pieces of on Scripple's blog, like the D100 skeletons list, where you have exoskeletons or ball skeletons, wheel skeletons. You have a skelecopter, spinning knife-edged arms, flies one half normally and unsteadily. Ghost skeletons. You have people that are disguised as skeletons, stone skeletons, ice skeletons. You have a twist, so you never have to have a normal, boring skeleton ever again. Dragons, of course, get a huge write-up with tons of different possible varieties of them, with new special abilities and flavor. You have a random generator for the type of horde that they have, some of which are very strange, like it's a horde just of insects or music. They often have curiosities or capstones, like an ash wand, stone to lava, a petrified royal, or just blackmail. Very useful thing to pick up in a horde. I love the artist in this section, by the way. The way that all of the pieces of art tend to be kind of rectangular and fit into the boxes is really delightful for some reason. I love how in the Thinking Beasts section you have a sphinx, and it just doesn't give you stats and information about it. It gives you riddles, because sphinxes have riddles. So there's D20 riddles, and there's also D20 dark riddles. So these are riddles more like the kinds that you would ask Gollum, or Gollum would ask you in his cave, things that have a kind of a nasty twist to them. The Heraldic Beast section includes things like the basilisk, the chimera, the cockatrice, one of my favorite creatures. Great art. I just love this illustrator. Griffins, hydras, owlbears, the questing beast, of course, the greatest and most noble of these types of creatures. The strong toad, worms, this being like the purple worm, for example. I guess one of the major criticisms I would have of the book is really not that there's something wrong with it, but I wish that perhaps it was more focused on less creatures. There are some creatures in here that are really fun and are very fleshed out, like dragons and liches and things like that. But every once in a while, you do run across a creature where there's really not that much information, right? Flying lizard. Short little stat block right here, and then a tiny little random table to flesh it out a bit. Do you actually need that in a monster manual? Probably not. I mean, it could be useful if you have like a monster island, but I think I would probably prefer to see maybe 100 creatures instead of 200 and have each of them be as fleshed out as the tyrant lizard, for example, because I love the amount of variety that you can provide for some of these. And just the format of the book means that some of them are not going to have that much information, which just makes them less useful. Every once in a while, you run into fun little Easter eggs like the Gru here, A Gru's world is not bounded by stone or air, it is bounded by light. Light is an impenetrable barrier. Surround one with light and it will be squeezed out of existence. A Gru cannot attack anyone in the light, but in darkness, you are likely to be eaten. Comment below if you get that reference. What does this elemental want? Because elementals are just beings made out of one particular element. They're very inscrutable, very inhuman. So it gives you the types of desires that different elementals would have. So a stone/sand elemental would want a change of scenery carried far, far away, or pattern lines drawn and heaped. But a larger stone elemental might want respect, or new neighbors, quarrels have arisen, or an adjacent stone pulverized. Angels get lots of information right here with divine messages that they are sending, commands, one-word commands that they can give you that you are forced to obey, different virtues, what they judge you on, questions that they ask you, makes them very terrifying. And D100 angels, of course. You got a generic cosmology that you can roll up. For example, the sky is an endless void lit by distant suns. The wandering stars are the eyes of a dead god. And the sun is a titanic orb of unnatural fire. It's interesting the way that different creatures are framed. For example, the beast of creation is basically a Tarrasque or like a kaiju, and it's put in the divine creature section. So it's kind of rethemed to fit with these divine beasts, these things that are as old as creation and are almost like miniature gods that could be worshipped. Almost as useful as the monsters themselves are these occasional side tables like D100 domains, which is kind of attached to demigods, but is very useful if you're just creating pantheons in general. Or you might have a list of D100 prophecies, like an assassin will turn their dagger inward, or all rivers will run backwards, or a gold statue will be formed from vile dust. Vampires get a nice big section, including their special contagion methods, their special abilities, restrictions that they have, weaknesses. Vampires are famously complex creatures because there's so much folklore surrounding them, so you can pick and choose the things that apply to your vampires. There's a whole generic gothic manor right here. You got werewolves, wights, zombies, and one of my favorite sections, a wizard did it. This section includes all of the really strange, weird creatures that don't have a good explanation for why they might exist. The best explanation is that a wizard did it. The Eye Tyrant, or Beholder, is one of my favorite sections right here, mostly just because it has an entire column that is just the Beholder raving. And so as you are playing the game, you can just start screaming this at the top of your lungs to freak the players out or just to make them really, really annoyed with the Beholder so that they want to kill it. One of my favorite things about this book that I completely forgot to point out so far is that every one of these monsters has a menu section attached to them, which tells you what it's like to eat that particular monster. Or most of them do. The Shivered Beast doesn't have one. So what that means is that you definitely can use this book to play, what is that manga? Delicious in Dungeon, or there's a Japanese name for it, where if you go around and just trying to eat all of the things in the dungeon, that is an option here. Although very frequently it is a bad idea because sometimes it just straight up kills you, or there's like a 50% chance of it killing you. But if you eat some creatures, you can gain significant benefits. Here's a few more examples of some creatures with very short little write-ups right here. Again, examples of things that, in my opinion, probably should have been cut just to make room for fleshing out some of the more famous monsters a bit more in depth. The fall section tends to be very Halloween themed with things like harvest avatars, murderous crows, scarecrows, tempest tags, and things like that. While the winter section is, well, you guessed it, very ice themed. Though a lot of them are just kind of Christmassy, like the biscuit golem if you want to have a gingerbread man. Lots of different options right here if you want to eat a biscuit golem. He always tastes like delicious confectionery, and he's pretty much always good for you, no matter what type he is. There's, of course, a bear section, which is always useful because when in doubt, you can just use bear stats, and your players will probably not know. Start with the bear, add some special abilities on, and it'll probably be fine. A lot of these sections near the back, which focus on different environments, tend to have a lot of standard creatures, boars. For example, it flavors them up a little bit with some legendary boars, so they have some special abilities. But typically, I don't find these types of creatures to be that useful. You got tigers, giant snakes, and things like that. In most of my games, these creatures usually don't come up too much. And if they do, they're very straightforward. Baboons, how often has baboons really come up in your game? Could that be used for other things? Probably. Same goes for hippopotamuses or hyenas, lions, rhinoceroses, etc. But looking at it overall, it's awfully hard to complain about just the sheer wealth of content and useful bits of information that this book provides. It is often just really fun to read the random tables. And I love random tables. These are some of the best examples of it that I've seen out there. An unexpected but pretty fun section at the back is just science fiction, which I think is a great way to pay tribute to the way that Dungeons & Dragons was a kind of sci-fi fantasy game for a really long time. There's sci-fi elements kind of sprinkled in there, especially in early versions of the game. And it's fun to throw that stuff in there just to catch your players off guard. I love how all these different types of robots have a wide variety of not just a random table, but little pictures of all of their different parts. So you can look at these pictures and mix and match them between all these different types of robots to create something unique. Another fun Easter egg is the Celestial Index of Benevolent Knowledge. So this refers to a story by Jorge Luis Borges, probably saying his name wrong, where in this short story, a philosopher finds a book that organizes everything in the universe by certain categories. And these categories are those belonging to the emperor, embalmed ones, trained ones, suckling pigs, mermaids, fabled ones, stray dogs, and things like that. Just random stuff. And the point of the short story is that the universe can really be organized any way that you want. And any system of organization is going to cover everything and is going to be somewhat arbitrary. I just like how this book takes that idea and runs with it and actually organizes all of the monsters by the categories in that short story. Kind of a deep cut of an Easter egg, but I thought it was funny. This extra section at the back is kind of funny in that it organizes the monsters in the book by hit dice, and it puts them in these columns if they're sort of related to each other. So for example, a goblin is like a 0 hit dice type of creature, but if that upgraded to a 1 hit die creature, it would be an orc. If it upgraded a bit more, it would be an ogre, and then a troll, and then a giant, and then a noble giant. So you can imagine the way that PCs gain levels over time. Those levels often have titles associated with them. It's almost like that, where they're organized in that fashion, where you can see how these have the kind of chain of evolution, where you can imagine each of these evolving into the next. You can see dragons evolving right there, or different types of plant creatures over here, or animated items and golems. It's a fun idea, and just one way to organize creatures and see how they're related to each other. An index of monster utility. So this just organizes monsters by what they are doing or what they are good for, which is another way to grab monsters that you need when you need them. So trained, then aimed. So a monster that you could actually use as a kind of weapon. There's a whole bunch of them right there. Things that you would just have to unleash. Things that give you cynical advice. Here you go. There's 10 of them. We have a generic plan for a mega dungeon. This one I think is actually pretty useful because it gives you ideas for what to put on each level, both in terms of the theme of that room or that level, but also the monsters that would go there. So if you're constructing your own, this is a useful template to use. There's also an alphabetical index of all monsters at the back. What I like about this is it doesn't just have all the monsters that are in this book, but it also includes all of the different names for them that you might find, so you can easily find the equivalent in this book. For example, if you look up a displaced cat, then it refers you to the shivered beast. Or if you look up a seraphim, it refers you to angel. And that's it for the Monster Overhaul. It was really a delight to read this book. It was a lot of fun. I was always surprised. I laughed a bunch of times reading some of the descriptions. A really fun book, and it's genuinely useful and practical like it says on the cover. If I am prepping an adventure and I need a monster manual to draw ideas from, this is the book that I would use if it was a standard OSR type of game. As usual, I will put links in the description below for where you can pick this up in PDF or print form if you want to get a copy for yourself. And thanks for watching, everybody. I'll see you next time.